Here. Well, awesome. Thank you all for being here today and for joining us for this workshop on how to define your social impact business model with the mission model canvas. My name is Cameron Law, and I'm the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. I'm joined by two of my colleagues. We have one of our entrepreneurs in residence, Dr. Brian Gladden, and then we have Arlene Miranda, who's our longstanding Carlson Center team member, and she's our Administrative Systems and Operations Analyst. But for those of you that don't know the Carlson Center, we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to explore and launch their businesses. And we have a mission to make innovation and entrepreneurship pervasive throughout the greater Sacramento region, really working to realize this vision of making the Sacramento region a premier hub of innovation and entrepreneurship. And we've really operationalized this mission and vision around core concepts of discover, build, and launch, and that we're really trying to work with you along the continuum of your entrepreneurial journey. And so today's workshop falls under our Discover programs to really provide you with some of those mindsets and tools to go through that business creation process. And we're excited to be part of your entrepreneurial journey. So before I hand it over to Brian, who will be leading us through our workshop here today, wanted to do just a little bit of housekeeping. We'd love to see your smiling faces and your curious minds on the screen. So if you're able to turn your video on, we'd love that. If not, no worries. We totally understand. And then we would ask that if you remain muted just during the presentation portion, so for recording purposes, makes for a better experience when you're going back and reliving this workshop. But if you do have questions, feel free to use the chat feature or the raised hand features. We're going to try and filter them towards the end. But if you do have a pressing question, feel free to shoot me a chat or raise that hand during the presentation. And if you want to explore that chat feature, go ahead and introduce yourself to those in the room. You can share your name, where you're joining us from, and the impact area you're focused on. And if you want to share your LinkedIn to connect with one another, feel free to go ahead. So we're excited to have you all in the space, and I'll turn it on over to Brian, who will launch into the session. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Cameron. Welcome, everybody. Let me share my screen. And we will get moving here. So love to see everybody's faces. All right, computer's a little slow here. Trying to move my desktop, almost. And there we go. Hopefully you guys are seeing it correctly. All right, get my trusty annotation tool. Boom. All right, welcome to Mission Model Canvas, and really your social impact business that you're hopefully creating or have created or want to create. And what we're going to talk about today is your mission-driven business and how to make the most out of that, your social impact that you're trying to create, and really what goes into creating a business model for social impact versus a normal for-profit private enterprise that has many different components versus a social impact mission-driven business. We're going to look at the beneficiaries, buy and support, deployment, impact measurement today. And these are some key things in the mission model canvas that you probably heard about or you wouldn't be here, and hopefully get some more deep dive into that tool today. So mission-driven business, really, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about firms who want to do good in the world, right? Social innovation and mission-driven firms kind of hand in hand. So what does this mean? Well, mission-driven companies, we just here with me kind of believe that it's possible to have a positive impact on a social or environmental issue while considering all stakeholders and staying committed to product development, profit, social responsibility, and sustainability. So those last couple things are a little bit unique to a social impact business versus traditional business. So a lot of larger firms now are getting into social responsibility, which is great. Let's try and do good, right? The triple bottom line, people, planet, profits, and also sustainability. the biggest difference with a mission-driven business is that your goal is to do something good in the world, not just make money. And because of that, there are different components that go into your business model that we need to take a look at. Social innovation kind of goes hand in hand with businesses who want to create social impact, mission-driven, with a specific purpose. So what is social innovation? Well, it's really the invention, development, implementation of new ideas to solve problems faced by individuals, groups, or communities. So, we have a mission-driven need, we create social innovation. And so we're going to talk today on what are some tools, specifically the mission model canvas, to help us optimize our probability that this impact we want to have in the world can actually be realized. So you might be in one of these categories. I want to do good in some area, whether it's education or poverty, hunger, clean water, energy, climate. All these are awesome impact goals. And these 17 goals here are from the United Nations. These are the Sustainable Development Goals. If you go to their website, it has lots of details behind them. So usually some sort of social impact business will fall into one of these, and maybe you have several areas you impact, which is great. And to do that, we want to make sure that we are actually creating a sustainable impact. So if it's climate, how do we do that? And it's really difficult to create some sort of massive impact in your community or the world by yourself. So a little different than a private business where you might just be able to make a good living with a small customer base. When we talk about social impact, we actually need to talk about scaling that up, and we're going to talk about that today. So social impact business models. We'll talk about the mission model canvas. So if you have been with us in any of our previous workshops, you might know that we use the business model canvas or the lean canvas we talk about. And this is really the starting point, the business model canvas, created by Strategizer, Alex Osterwalder, actually the creator of this. And this is the normal tool that business schools, a lot of Fortune 500, even small, hopefully mid-sized firms are using these tools. But your business model in general is how you create, deliver, and capture value. And on the left side, we kind of have you, the business, what you do and how you make things. And on the right, we have the customer side. And there's 9 elements of that business model: how we get things to market, how we make money, and then our thing that we create here is in the middle, the value proposition. But for a mission-driven business, a few of these components really don't jive, right? So we don't have customers. So if we look at the mission model canvas, it looks very similar, but you'll see these 5 things circled in red are different than the business model canvas. These side over here is all the same, but instead of customers, we have beneficiaries. Instead of relationships, we have buy-in support. Instead of channels, we have deployment. Instead of revenue, we have impact factors and mission achievement. And instead of cost, we have a little bit additional here. We have our budget, right, which could be grants and things like that. So the budget one is not that much different. We're actually going to focus on these 4 just due to time and the differences that you'll see when you do your business model. So taking a little bit deeper dive into the mission model canvas, the first one we really are going to take a look at is beneficiaries. So when we talk about starting a new business, defining your business model, the 2 most important things are the customer and the problem they have, right? So, and if there's no problem, then nothing else matters in your business model because you're not really providing any value for somebody. So when we look at customers, we try and define problems. What's our solution? How is it going to solve that problem? Their job to be done. But when we have a mission-driven business, we actually have many stakeholders or beneficiaries, not just one customer segment. So we want to look at the function. Who are the individuals that you're creating value for? What do they do? How do they play in the ecosystem? And we'll go through some examples, but think of the end user who you want to have a social impact for. But then you also might have legislators, who's making the law, that they're a key stakeholder. You might have distributors. You might have other partners, people that make that social impact work. And your new solution, service, product, whatever it is, you need to take into account how you are affecting all those beneficiaries and stakeholders. The second area, and most important really, is that impact factor. What is this mission you're trying to achieve? And we really want to understand, how do we measure that versus profits and bottom line revenue and margin? We really don't care about those things in a mission-driven business. We care about what is the impact we're having: climate, hunger, literacy, right? How do we do that? So we're going to talk through those. And for each beneficiary group, you need to know what matters to them. How do we measure the impact to those beneficiary groups? The third one is deployment. So when we think about normal for-profit business, it's about channels. How do we get our product or service to the end user, the customer? Brick and mortar store, the internet, right? Distributors. But when we talk about a mission-driven business, it's more about deployment. How do we get this thing that's going to create social impact to the masses? And what will it take to deploy this minimum viable product to widespread use, not just early adopters? And what constitutes a successful deployment? The last one is then buy-in support. Not a lot different than customer relationships, so we'll only spend a little bit of time, but for each beneficiary, how does your team get buy-in from them? Getting buy-in from a legal legislature is much different than getting buy-in from a local partner for distribution, right? So all those things you have to take into account. So let's look at a couple of examples first to kind of wrap your head around this, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into each section. This is a little bit of an eye chart, but it's a real one. So Steve Blank and Alex Osterwalder created the mission model canvas coming out of the business model canvas. And it actually started with Steve Blank working with the Department of Defense. And you might have seen these things on, if you Googled it, or seen some videos of Steve Blank. And these are some real ones that came out of his work with the Department of Defense. And the important thing, we won't go through all of it, but the important things I think to note are the color coding here. So as you go through and build your business model and first define who your beneficiaries are, each of these is a different group in the colors. So here he's talking about, in this case, a defense product that is coming to market. And who are these beneficiaries? Well, tactical operators. So they've got SEALs and Rangers, private sector and academic partners. Stanford Lab manufacturers as examples he put here. Program managers of the Department of Defense. The SOCOM, so lots of acronyms here for Department of Defense, and then Border Patrol. And so understanding who all these different groups are that might either be needed, involved, or are beneficiaries of outcomes of your new product or service is important. And then you can actually color code as well here. What are the value props, the features of my thing that are going to help those beneficiaries? And then buy-in support. So for tactical operators here, they listed, let's demonstrate the utility and gain support from senior personnel. That's how we're going to get buy-in. For the private sector, let's show opportunities for new revenue streams. So very different than operators. For the program manager of the Department of Defense, let's add utility to current program of record to increase adoption. For the SOCOM group, let's provide low-cost product with the new capabilities. And then this last one is an interesting one, saboteurs. So in most mission-driven businesses, social impact, you'll have saboteurs who aren't really on board with your mission, and you have to understand who those people are. It could be somebody that is on the other side of what you believe in. It could be somebody that is creating a different law, legislation. So who are those people? Maybe you're taking jobs away from somebody that's getting grant money for something else. So there's always that saboteur that you need to understand. So here is competition within this SOCOM group he's calling out. And deployment, they were looking at, let's do demonstration days, let's do technical experimentation and conferences. That's how we're going to get the word out. We're going to do YouTube videos on how to do this. So understanding how that's going to scale is really important. And then mission achievement, what were they looking at? Well, it's instead of revenue, improved situational awareness for small units in combat, reduced workload for tactical operators and feed monitoring operators, and decreased strain on other traditional assets. So very specific examples here, real example. Probably doesn't mean a lot to most of us, these acronyms and what they're doing, but that's okay. The point is that you need to understand who the beneficiaries are, how you're going to scale it, and what matters to each of those people, and then how you're going to measure it. Because if we don't measure the impact, then we can't prove to our stakeholders, the people who are either funding us, the grantors, the partners, distributors, all the key people, that we've actually done what we set out to do. So we have to really understand how to measure that impact. So let's look at a little bit easier example. I wanted to throw this one here because it's a real one you could Google out there. Here's an example that I've actually created in a company called ShelterBox. Some of you might know who they are. And as a Rotarian, we work with ShelterBox. ShelterBox is a nonprofit that creates as you see here in the picture, a disaster relief in a box. So it has tents, it has shovels, it has pots and pans and blankets and first aid kits. So think about disaster relief. Think about hurricanes, earthquakes, Haiti, things like that. Katrina, people are displaced. Well, they need somewhere to live and somewhere to keep them safe. So they bring in these shelter boxes, and you as a nonprofit can pay for them, help distribute them. So when I look at this, the first thing over here in the beneficiaries is, who are these beneficiaries? Well, they're displaced families without access to shelter. The second group is disaster victims. Third group is government relief organizations, and then non-governmental organization relief. So there's different groups involved when there's major disasters, both the people that are affected and those other groups who are helping. So what is the mission achievement here? Well, it's improved psychological well-being long-term of the family. You're safe. It's reduced morbidity and mortality. Let's keep people out. If they've survived a disaster, let's make sure they don't are out there with no shelter. They get food, they get water. Improved access to education and livelihood sustained. How can we continue to get back to create revenue and live for our family, create an income? How are we going to deploy and scale this? Well, we need logistics partners, we need foreign aid from nonprofits, and we need in-region distribution centers to actually get these things to people in hard-to-reach places. How are we going to do buy-in support? Well, we're going to deliver to the disaster locations. We're going to demonstrate contents to key partners and stakeholders so they understand how to use it, what's in there, how it works, how to set it up, and create videos showing the box in use and being deployed. So when we take a look at this as a whole, we can understand that it's great just to create this product, but to try and scale something to create global impact in this case will be really difficult for you to do it on your own, even if you had some funding, because now you're talking about governments being involved, disaster relief organizations. Can imagine if there's hurricanes that are coming now in Florida, FEMA's involved, the state government's involved, American Red Cross, things like that. How can you partner with those groups to actually increase your impact? So you're doing a piece of it, but you're not doing everything. So after taking a look at just some high-level examples, and we're going to come back to the ShelterBox in a minute, let's look at the beneficiaries and their problems. And if you've been with us on any other workshops, you might have seen this slide before, and it's really appropriate here. So it's a mindset shift. Love the problem, not your solution. So you might have this wonderful idea to create social impact, but what are the problems that you're helping solve for those beneficiary groups? That's the most important thing you need to think of. You might not be one of those beneficiaries, so your assumptions might be incorrect. We need to go out and, just like a for-profit, our customer segments, what job do they have to get done for all of our beneficiaries? What are the problems that they really need solved? What are the most important things to that group? A way to think about this in a tool, in design thinking, is all about understanding and empathizing with those beneficiaries. And so think about all of my beneficiary groups. If I put myself in their shoes, what are the most important things that they are trying to overcome or get solved for? And that is what our social impact new venture needs to actually focus on. A way to think about that, if you've been with us before, also we've shown this, is this concept of a job to be done. And it really is now a beneficiary's job to be done. Like the ShelterBox example, the very functional job there would be to get them supplies, right? So I have a tent to live in, I have a pot to cook in. But beneficiaries also have emotional and social jobs to get done. So I want to feel safe. I want to make sure that my kids are safe in a disaster. They're not sleeping in the rain, right? That they feel safe. Socially, I want to, what are the things that I want to be perceived that I'm taking care of things, or I'm getting back on my feet, right? So we all have functional, emotional, and social needs. What are the jobs or problems that your beneficiary groups need to get done? And we need to make sure we take those into account when you're designing your social impact solution. A tool that can help you understand better your beneficiaries' needs is the value proposition canvas. It's a layer underneath the mission model canvas. And we, again, have talked about this in our toolkit series if you've been with us. And it's no different for beneficiaries in a social impact venture. The only difference is we usually are going to have several beneficiary groups that we talked about. The value prop really takes the value proposition here in the middle and your beneficiary group and highlights them so that you, as the social entrepreneur, can really understand your beneficiary groups better. What jobs are they trying to get done, problems? What are the gains they need to have happen or want to have happen? What are they worried about, their pains and fears? And then whatever this social impact thing you're creating, product or service, what are the features of it that are going to help this beneficiary group overcome those needs? And when you do your value prop canvas to better understand your beneficiaries' needs and jobs, do one of these for each beneficiary group. Each of your stakeholder groups, do a value prop canvas. Don't try and fit it all into one. So if you have 4 different beneficiary groups, make 4 different canvases. So your distributors and partners might have a very different need than the legislature or a governmental agency you're working with, as well as then the end user, right? The displaced family has a very different need versus an NGO. And here, focus on many of the different stakeholders within each group. So purchasers, influencers, decision makers, contractors, policymakers, which is a big one usually for social impact, and the last one, saboteurs, which in a for-private enterprise, we usually don't think of saboteurs, right? We think of competition, but here that could be a competitor. Again, it could be somebody who has a different way of thinking. Think about, you're doing something with gun control or climate. Well, someone might be on the other side of the fence of whatever that topic is, right? So how are people going to try and limit you or inhibit you from making your impact at scale? So I've made an example of the ShelterBox with the value prop canvas. So let's take a look at this. And remember, we have many different stakeholders if you think back to the ShelterBox mission model canvas. But the main one is the families who are displaced, right? So here is just a picture of a displaced family, disaster response. This is the beneficiary group for this value prop canvas. So when I think about them, what are the main jobs they want to get done? Well, they want shelter for their family. They want access to food. They want blankets or clothing, keep warm, and they want clean water. Probably many more, but high level. What are some positive gains they hope to have happen if these jobs get done? Well, you want the ability to cook. You want warmth for your family members. You want to be free from insects. You'd love a waterproof shelter. What are some worries and fears you have if you don't get shelter or food or clothing or water? Well, you don't have any money to pay for these goods. You have no way to transport goods to where you're at. You have a lack of safety at night. You have a lack of tools. And you maybe have the inability to set up a tent. Maybe you're injured, or you're just not somebody that can do that, right? Not physically strong enough. So ShelterBox looked at these needs, gains, and pains, and what do they do? Well, they created this box that has all these things in it. What are some of these gain creators inside this box? Well, the first is a tent. Basically, a 6-person tent is inside this box. That's going to help them, obviously, with shelter and warmth and being free from insects and having a waterproof shelter. There's actually blankets in this thing. And there are pots and pans. So these things here map directly to these potential gains that they want and the jobs to get done. It also has in there some solar lights. So at night they feel safe. You have, whether it's from other people or animals, you have tools, shovels, saws, hammers, tarps, so that you have now the ability to either set this up or to take care of yourself. And most importantly, logistics. So it has partners and NGOs and distributors that actually bring the boxes to the displaced people for free. So you don't have to pay for them and you don't have to transport them. So now we have a fit, a problem solution fit between your social impact idea and venture and a beneficiary or stakeholder group that you're trying to help and impact. Do one of these for each of your beneficiaries and really focus on the most important aspects of your business model. So the second area is buy-in support. Not a lot of time spent here, but if we look at the buy-in support area, very similar to relationships in the normal business model canvas, but a little bit different. So for buy-in of beneficiaries, the question is, whose buy-in is needed in order to deploy the product or service? So that's the first one, right? How do we get this thing deployed? And it's just not, a store, because that doesn't have a lot of social impact, right? You're not scaling it. So do we need policy creation? Do we need procurement in different groups? How do those beneficiaries buy into this? Is it, could be a mandate, could be legislation, right? Is it a user's requesting this of somebody? So how do we deploy this thing we're creating? Then once it's deployed, how do we support and maintain long-term these relationships and keep in touch with all of our stakeholders and ecosystem so that they're bought in and there is support long-term, right? Otherwise, your social impact won't be sustainable if we don't have this ongoing support and maintenance. We'll move on to deployment. So deployment and the last one, impact, are a little bit more important here and different. So when we think of a normal for-profit business, we talk about channels. We talk about how do we get our products and services to the end user. Well, just getting, as an example, the ShelterBox to the end user is good, but it's not good enough for a social impact because we need to scale and diffuse. And so these terms are pretty important. So when we talk about deployment for a social impact venture, we're talking about scaling something to the masses, whether it's a community or global in nature. And so that deployment at scale, we talk about, is diffusion. How do we diffuse this cause or the thing you're creating for good to the masses? So think about it from this perspective, from just distribution to deployment. What will it take to deploy the product or service from our current minimum viable product to widespread use among people who need it. And that's the key versus a traditional business, right? We might spend a year or 2 years, making some money on a traditional business, but it's small impact. You're not, trying to sell something globally. Maybe it's just in your local area that you do business in. Well, for social impact, you're not going to have a whole lot of really impact from a social perspective. So we need to think about it in terms of widespread use is the key. And then what constitutes a successful deployment? We need to define really the end in mind when you start with your business model. And this is a key concept to think about. And I say one of the key terms to jot down is starting with the end in mind. So if you're doing a social venture, what impact are you trying to make? How many people are you trying to help? Is it a community? Is it global? What does success look like for your social venture? And then we have to work backwards to understand, to do that, who needs to be involved. You might have seen historically the diffusion of innovation curve here, and Jeffrey Moore's crossing the chasm. How do we get from small amounts of customers, early adopters, to the mass of the market? Well, when we think about this in terms of social impact innovations, it's very different, because you, as an entrepreneur, might have created a business, and yes, you want to scale up and do great, but you could potentially even sell your business before you get to the masses. You're like, hey, I'm just going to do an IPO, I'm getting bought out, great, I'm done. Or maybe you're making enough money just selling to a few customers that you have a livelihood and you're not worried about really scaling up, and that's too much stress. But it's different for a social venture, because if you're not reaching the masses, you're not having a big impact on society, right? The whole goal is to scale and diffuse and to help the masses for a social impact. The biggest problem is crossing this chasm. Most businesses fail after getting to up to 10%. Getting to that majority of the market is very difficult. We need to understand that as a social impact, that we can't do this alone. You're going to need partners to help you scale this social venture. And when we focus in on that chasm, we can understand what are the problems here. So great, you've got this cool idea for social impact. You've done a pilot prototype, wonderful, just like a normal business. But to diffuse and scale a social impact, you're going to have a few things, right? You need funding. So is that grant funding, from nonprofits, from federal, from private, foundations? Who's the ecosystem that you need to work with to distribute these goods, to reach the most amount of people? And then, do you need people yourself, or are there other people that are selling or servicing or helping, whether it's healthcare or education or whatever it might be, poverty, homelessness? You're going to have many stakeholders to help you scale this idea. And you need to start with that end in mind, so that you can work those partners into your ecosystem, those beneficiaries, from the ground up, because you need to know what's important to them so that you can scale this thing once it's ready, versus a traditional MVP business and you'll slowly be able to get product market fit. That's not what we're shooting for. So impact measurement, we do all this. How do we know that it's going to work, or that we made an impact? And we have to start with that end in mind. Theory of change, we don't have time today to go into it, but you might want to write that down and Google it. It's all about, what is the impact I want to have? How do I create change in the world? And to do that, we really need to understand, what is our goal and what factors do we need to measure so that we can prove that we're making an impact. So mission achievement is the value you're creating for the sum of all the beneficiaries, the greater good, not just one of the beneficiaries. There's only mission achievement if it delivers value to the end beneficiary. So if we think about the ShelterBox example, if you're only helping some NGOs and a few things, but you're not actually helping a displaced family, you probably haven't achieved your goal. So how do we put in some metrics to manage the impact and make sure that we're actually getting towards that. Because then the more impact you're creating, obviously the more people and other organizations will probably want to join in. Think of the Gates Foundation. We're going to show some examples in a second of how they measure. So why measure, first of all? Well, we want to focus the org on specific outcomes, so you know what you're striving to. We want to gather evidence to iterate on your solution. Just like a normal product or service, it's for profit, it's always evolving. We want to have evidence for funding. So whether it's grant or private, you're going to need to show proof. And we want to be able to scale to understand how we're reaching the masses. So that's why we're measuring. And a great graphic from the Gates Foundation on actionable management. Think about it in 3 simple ways. We want to track our progress. So we want to hold ourselves accountable for what we do, how we do it, measuring those inputs and activities that are going to show our investments, that we're actually on track to make a positive impact. We also want to inform our strategy. So we want to go out and test our assumptions, just like we talk about traditional business, track our achievements, by measuring our outputs. And that is going to help tell us internally, are we on track? Are we succeeding or failing? So, your strategy is always evolving, strategic planning. And then we want to contribute to the greater good, right? To the field of people that are also like you, like-minded folks, in accomplishing a shared goal. Shared outcomes, collaborating with partners, the populations you're serving. We want to make sure that we can prove that we're actually helping them. So then what do we measure? Start with your purpose statement and focus on your outcomes and impact. So what is it you're doing, right? What's your purpose, your vision for this social venture you're doing? We want to have observable, specific, and measurable changes that we can quantify, an actual impact on someone's life. And so we're going to go through an example of maybe some ones that aren't really that impactful as far as metrics. So the first thing is inputs. What resources do you have that are invested in this? The next is, what are the outputs? What are the results of those activities? But that's not enough. Then we need to look at, what are the outcomes? What are the changes in conditions for your stakeholders and beneficiaries? And then lastly, what does that mean? What's the impact? What are the long-term changes in human well-being and the environment from those outcomes? And so let's take a look at an example. So impact metrics and best practices. Simple, observable, just use 1 to 5 metrics, otherwise you're going to get too inundated. That how we show lives impacted. We want to directly relate this to your organization's purpose and vision, and look at some industry standards. We want to have trackable within the organization. Everybody should know what you're focusing on with the end in mind, and it's regularly reviewed inside your organization. So an example of things that could look like, it could be how much money is invested, how many people have we helped, how many people we supported, how many people do we reach, we provided this, and we improved this, right? There's some different metrics and way to look at it. We don't want to use the wrong metrics to make ourselves look good, but really don't have any impact. So we'll kind of talk through an example of that. So let's just say you spent $100 on purchasing 100 mosquito nets. That's great. Those are the inputs. $100, 100 mosquito nets. But that really isn't going to tell you made an impact. The outputs of that, you could say, well, we distributed 98 mosquito nets to families in a certain area. Okay, those are outputs. What are the outcomes? 75% of the families installed and used the nets correctly, resulting in 50% drop in malaria cases. Awesome. What was the impact long term? Regionally, childhood mortality rates due to malaria halved over a 5-year period. Those are impactful metrics. So understanding that just saying we bought $100 in nets and got 100 nets is not the impact. It's what did those things cause over time, right? And the outcomes is great. This is more, longitudinal data. You obviously need a little bit of runway to show impact, but at least you can say here, yeah, we gave 100 nets out. Okay, well, did everybody install them? Do they know how to use them? Did it actually do anything? And so that outcome is really that first step, and then hopefully long-term, what's the impact? So here, kind of wrapping up, is an impact example, Feeding America, a real example. Their vision, is an America where no one's hungry, right? That's their purpose, vision, values. And so from that, their measurement of inputs and outputs. Look at feeding. So we fed nearly 5.2 billion meals to people. Over 2 billion pounds of food received. Okay, they received food, they fed people. They nourished over 50% of network members engaged in healthcare partnerships, and 72% of food distributed by the network is promoting good health. Okay. You as a donor helped empower network members, and nearly 50% of network members engaged in ending hunger. Okay, wonderful. We helped unite over 1.2 million people of Feeding Americas through social media. And then we helped connect, we got $240 million in grants. So here are some of the inputs and outputs, but that's not the impact. So when they look at impact, 4 billion pounds of groceries were rescued from going to waste. 1.8 billion pounds of fresh produce were distributed to families, and over 573 million meals were given to people. So when you think about inputs, outputs, outcomes, and really long-term impact, that's how you need to think about your social impact venture, and start with the mission model canvas so you can better define your beneficiaries and the impact you want to have with the end in mind. So you can get those stakeholders and key people involved from the beginning so that you can get that scale and diffusion and really reach the impact you want to reach. I'm going to stop there so that we have time for questions, right? Perfect. 15 minutes is what we wanted. We can go back and revisit.
Perfect. So we'll open it up for Q&A. Looks like we've got a couple raised hands. So if you want to use that raised hand feature, or if you want to just private message me or throw the question in the chat, I can help bring them in as well. Chirag, you have the first question, so feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Yes, thank you so much. And first of all, this is my first time being here. So this was a new kind of environment, ecosystem that I witnessed right now. So I'm really, really grateful for that. And to start with, I'm a Sac State student. So I'm pursuing my master's in business right now. So my question to you is something else, but I want to start with as I said, I'm doing master's in business, right? So we always talk about corporate social responsibilities, how we talk about business canvas and ECG normally, right? So what I want to know more about this, I always used these business canvas, but now you told me how to use it perfectly. I always had the chance to think about how NGOs would use it, because I had a friend who had these kind of things, but I never saw her using this kind of canvas to do the thing she was doing. She was somewhere near, but today I'm calling her after this, I got something for you, right? So this is the kind of environment I was looking forward to what I got. Thank you for that. And my question is, as I said, I'm in my master's, but after 5-6 months, I'll be done with that. And I want to use this, what I learned today, right? So for me, I can't start my business. Someday I would love to be a part on a huge level. But as you said, we are all a small part of every single bit of it, right? So how could you suggest me to be a inactive or active part of it, and try to be a part in, try to be even a block of it, if I do not have time to invest myself totally into it, right? Even after I have 10 days or 12 days, I want to learn about it, how does it work, even if I cannot contribute 100% of my time into it. So is there any way possible to get involved into it actively or passively, to get an idea of it?
Brian, do you want me to take this one? Sure. So I think some ideas to learn more about the startup journey, as well as kind of the creation of some non-for-profits. So one organization that I would recommend connecting with is called the Impact Foundry. They're formerly known as the Northern California Nonprofit Resource Center. And I'm suggesting to connect to them because a lot of times when new nonprofits or social ventures are starting up, they look for advisory board members and people to be, volunteer support. And that might be a way where you can spend, a little bit less time to be a part of that startup journey. So that's one particular suggestion that I might have. I don't know if Brian has any in addition, but I think overall, I love the comments relating to the usage of the mission model canvas. It certainly is unique in terms of, I think the language makes it more accessible for a social venture. I know from my own experience in running a nonprofit and creating new product offerings, I wish I was more familiar with this stuff years ago, but that's why you bring in people like Brian to help educate you on that process. So thank you for sharing those thoughts, and we look forward to engaging you from the Carlson Center.
Just one last question, one last thing. Can you write it down in the chat so I can, or anything, because I live in the Sacramento area, so anything that in that reason you can drop it in the chat if possible.
Yep, you got it. I will put it in there right now.
Well said, Cameron. All right. Well, any other questions for folks out there?
If you want to throw it in the chat, or you can use the Tiffany. It looks like you have a question.
Yes, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for the invitation and for the presentation, Mr. Gladden. My question is regarding how to take this same model into, I think they call it like a B impact business. Like I have a background in working with 501c3s, and I want to do a startup that's still socially impactful, but also able to bring in real income. And I find it hard to do that. I don't know. I just wanted to hear a little bit more about not strictly 501c3 work, but how do you build that good B model that does a little bit of both?
Sure. So, I mean, this business model, the Canvas here, or the regular business model Canvas, you can use either one. So one of your impact factors can be still revenue, right? If you're a for-profit, you don't have to be a nonprofit business. If you're doing something that's a social impact business, great, you're going to have those things listed here too. But or the business model Canvas itself, either one is a great tool. Just depends if you're doing a social impact or not. I would recommend using this one because you've got beneficiaries and other things besides revenue. And it doesn't, you don't have to be a nonprofit to use this. It's just what are the things you're trying to make sure are your outcomes.
Yeah, I think if you don't mind me adding a couple thoughts, Brian, is I think one of the things as you look at who your customer on the business model canvas, and in this case your beneficiaries, sometimes the beneficiaries can't pay for the product or service that you're offering, right? And so when you look at the entirety of your business model, you certainly can have a fee for service, but the fee for service is who's paying for that particular service is kind of where you have to start mapping that out. So if you're trying to serve, underrepresented students, they might not have the capacity to pay you for that, but maybe a school district is willing to pay you for that because that helps them actually, achieve student outcomes and greater student success, right? And so that's how you'd have to look at it. So it certainly can be used either way. It's certainly harder to, focus on just a social impact business that's for profit, but I think we're having more movement towards that pathway for sure. So it's kind of thinking of what that fee for service model might be. Did that answer your question, Tiffany?
There's any?
Oh, yes, it did. Thank you very much.
Yep, of course.
Any other questions?
Yeah, it looks like Hakan has a question.
Yes, I have a question. Thanks, Brian, and thanks, Cameron, for organizing this very helpful session. My question is about So this model, which is based on the assumption that this is a self-sustainable enterprise, that you are going out there to help, to meet a societal need. If you add philanthropic support and also public institutions into the equation, I assume that this model would change. Some parts would be more important, some parts maybe shift directions. So what I mean is that instead of going out there as a startup, like you get some philanthropic support to help out some basic needs in the society, but then you eventually want to become self-sustainable. So how would the model change if you add those parameters to the model?
Yeah, I don't see it changing at all. So think about the details you just talked about would either be one of your beneficiary groups or be one of your partners. So whether it's the funding, it's legislation, it's schools, it's whoever it is, they're either a partner or they're a beneficiary in that case, right? Helping you deploy and create this thing. You're just talking about scale, how big and wide this thing is you're trying to create. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, you still have to document your business model. So the business model canvas or the mission model canvas, if you're doing a social venture, helps you document how you're creating, delivering, and capturing value. And that's really what you want to understand. The details behind this, you might have a lot more difficult. You're talking about a pretty big type of undertaking. So you're just going to have more pieces, much more difficult than some smaller impact. But the model itself, there's nothing else that's missing. You just have to understand what's the scope and how difficult is it going to be to actually achieve what you want to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one thing that a thought that came to mind as you talked about kind of philanthropy is maybe that's the mechanism of just like the initial startup investment. So maybe to get the venture started to, maybe ShelterBox's example is in order to get the first one developed, they needed an injection of, philanthropic capital to get them started. But then other than that, that was kind of, a core component of the business model is more that fee for service of actually selling the boxes to, disaster relief type of organizations.
Right. So kind of like here, right, we didn't talk too much, but kind of thought it was a given, but your mission, your budget, how are you getting that funding, right? Is it a grant? Is it private? Right. So now you're talking massive scale, and does that change over time so that you sustain it? So you might have, you're going to add continually pieces to this business model, right? Maybe you have the startup costs and you have sustaining costs and how you're going to fund those things. But the elements don't change. It's that detail that's going to continue to evolve.
I think we got time for maybe one or two more questions if we have them, and then we will conclude with a couple quick announcements. All right, we got
like Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for turning my video.
Do you mind if I ask you just to speak up just a little bit?
Oh, sorry. Apologies for not
Perfect.
turning my video on. So I'm joining you from the University of the West Indies in Kingston, Jamaica, Mona School of Business and Management. It's a really good presentation. I came in a little late, but I was quite enthralled by the addition of the saboteur in the presentation, which I don't usually see. And to be honest, I don't think I really think of that role much when we're factoring, what to think about for success. With that brought up, how do we, and I don't know if this is something you can address, how would we approach or try to win over that person, agency, whatever form they may take?
Great question. Yeah, great question. So I'll answer it a few ways. The first is you might not have to win them over, but you want to understand at least who they are, right? So that you know what to look out for. Again, think of gun control, and I'm on one side of the fence, you're on another. Maybe you're doing something to get, to change the law or something, and so you might have someone who's completely against you. There might not be anything you can do to win that person over, but you just need to identify who basically the saboteur, and this, almost like a competitor is, who is going to throw up roadblocks or doesn't agree with what you're trying to do. And it doesn't mean you're going to convince them. It just means you need to understand how to deploy your business, understanding those issues that might pop up, right? But hopefully it's not, that drastic, and you can create champions within whatever organization that is, that, someone else in an organization, one person might be a saboteur, another person might be a champion. So you just need to identify, how are things being done now? How does that social impact being solved for? And maybe you're taking funding from someone, that could be a saboteur. Well, I do that better than this new person wants to do that. So they're gonna, not want you to get that money, as an example. So I'd say first, just identify it. Maybe you can win them over, but you don't have to.
So I love that. It also makes me think of, I think you see the saboteur as part of, like, some impact areas are really complex, right? So the concept that comes to mind is like around homelessness, right? You can approach that from a mental health lens. You can approach that from a housing lens. And as Brian was saying, say you're from a city lens and trying to do an impact initiative or some sort of spin out, that's like, oh, that might be my budget that I'm working with. But if you're able to articulate to that saboteur that instead of throwing that roadblock up, that you actually achieve the outcomes that you're both working towards, right? And so that's really understanding that end in mind, as Brian was saying, that will help to alleviate some of that pain that the saboteur might be able to bring into the conversation, right? So it's, in a way, I think of it, how do you reduce the friction that that person or group of individuals might have in the overall movement of the impact that you're trying to create. And so it gives you language to understand where that might be coming up.
Yep, great job. Great question.
Thanks. Excellent feedback. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think we're at about time, so I will finish with some last, we have some events coming up, so want to make sure we share that. But to start, thank you all for being here. We are so excited to have you as part of the workshop. Thank you, Brian, for another tremendous informative session. So we will be sharing the recording of this, as well as PDFs of both the slides as well as the mission model canvas, so you can start to tackle defining your own social impact business model. If you want continued support, you're more than welcome to reach out to us at the Carlson Center. We have a wealth of resources on our website, and we also do office hours, and we do those virtually. I also threw in the chat, if you're a student here and part of the Soul Leadership Initiative, you can sign in and get credit for that. We are also running another workshop in 2 weeks on transforming your organization's culture, and really looking at, with that, is how can you, create a culture around innovation and defining that culture. And then we are also launching another one of our virtual entrepreneurship toolkit series. It's a 5-part series. We go through the lean canvas. You got a taste of the value proposition canvas, and we also are bringing in a number of key guest speakers. So that will start on August 4th and run through September 1st. Again, completely free and virtual, so we'd love for you to plug in there. And then we have 2 additional resources you can plug into, which are the Lean Innovator, which is a cohort program that is an application-based, and that one is particular for Sacramento area companies. And then Fourth Wave is a female-led technology accelerator that we would love to have you apply. Those applications close July 14th and then July 11th, respectively. So we'd love for you to plug in further to the Carlson Center, and we are so excited to have all of you and working towards your social impact. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Brian, for the workshop, and we look forward to sending these resources your way. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you all.